Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Arish Shah. Today via Zoom, I have with me Court Lorenzini. Court is a multi-time venture-backed founder best known for founding DocuSign and taking e-signature from niche to default and building one of the most valuable SaaS franchises of the past 2 decades, currently valued at around $14 billion in market cap. Since then, he's started and led multiple companies, serves as a strategic advisor and board member, and now founded and runs Founder Nexus, a global stage-segmented community where experienced VC-backed founders solve problems together by sharing lived experience rather than generic advice. In today's episode, we talk about how Founder Nexus wants to triple your odds of success.
I think triple is a low percentage differential.
How at DocuSign, Court hired a judge, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and a jury to litigate the case for digital signatures to convince inside counsel.
Digital signature was at a federal level legal and defensible.
Why the vast majority of modes of failure can be traced back to founder decisions, and Court's success equation, how every action or decision can be assigned an integer variable, and if only one decision is a failure, the whole business might collapse.
Every action and decision that the founders take specifically, think of them all as integer variables, 0 to 1, multiplied in a long string together.
How Founder Nexus prioritizes experience over advice, but that failure is as valuable as success, if not more so.
I think that's the most valuable experience. So those, not only do I welcome those people, I consider that a badge of honor.
How Founder Nexus wants to help build the future of entrepreneurial London and what it means to build a community of common interests.
London is an incredible town for business, and it is the venture community here is growing, but it's still, let's just say it's still not at Seattle, San Francisco, New York level.
Let's get straight into it. Hey guys, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Arish. I'm the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could like, rate, and subscribe wherever it is that you listen. And if you want to chat to me about absolutely anything, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or X. I'm always up for a bit of a natter. Right, let's get straight back into it. Court, really wonderful having you here with me today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of, I know, quite a busy schedule here in London this week. Thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me.
I'm excited. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's dive straight in. I want to decode DocuSign a little bit, right? Because there are only about 400 publicly listed tech companies with over 10 billion in market cap. So I'd love to understand from you, what were the 2 or 3 non-obvious decisions that actually bent the curve at DocuSign? Was it go-to-market? Was it pricing? Was it product sequencing? And kind of what did you get wrong before you got them right? Which I guess really goes to the heart of what you're trying to build with Founder Nexus as well, which we'll get onto.
Okay, so if I think about the things that really bent the curve, and I think that's a great way of thinking about it, I think the pricing and packaging model, which took quite a while to figure out, was one of them. And the other one was staying incredibly focused in the beginning on one market segment, which was residential real estate. And both of those things took a fair amount of time to discover along the journey. These were not obvious linchpins at the beginning, but I believe in hindsight, were absolutely the 2 of the several critical things that had to happen. Starting with the business model. The business model, when we started in 2003, our predecessors were all PKI-driven digital signature solutions, very software and tech heavy. And we were starting something that was not. We didn't want it to be tech heavy. We wanted it to be something that felt like using a piece of paper rather than something that required a bunch of digital back and forth software handshakes and private and public keys, etc. And frankly, the whole predecessor ground was littered with dead bodies, I should say. So I learned a lot from that. So figuring out how to package the product in such a way that it was, the way I like to describe it, easy to buy rather than easy to sell.
Yeah.
So I had to craft it in such a way that the buyer understood the value in the packaging. You were buying an envelope. And again, I'll reference that in 2003, our competition, I should say, was a fax machine and a FedEx envelope.
Yeah.
That's what we were competing against. There was no established digital signature anywhere under any circumstance. So we were dealing with old school technology, and it wasn't perceived by anyone that was using faxes and FedEx that it was broken. So you step into that space and you have to craft the package and the business model in such a way that people will easily understand it. So the idea of acquiring, we called them envelopes to mimic the FedEx envelope idea.
Yeah.
And we said, you need to buy an envelope. And instead of buying multiple FedEx envelopes to send, it was common business practice in the early 2000s that inside your FedEx envelope, you would send a return FedEx envelope or 2 or 3, depending on how many that needed to go out. So with every envelope you sent, you had to pay $10 to $20 to get it to the document to its endpoint. You would also include a prepaid return envelope that then would get it back to you. So this meant that if you needed 5 signatures, you needed 10 envelopes.
Yeah.
Okay. And each one cost you $15 to $20. So what we said is, let's call it an envelope, but let's say that you only have to buy one. And that envelope is good for an infinite number of signatures on that document. It could be one person has to countersign it, but it could be 5 or 10, and it doesn't cost you any more. That immediately framed it relative to a FedEx. And so those people got it.
So
and then we said,
just to interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
So actually it was almost the cost saving element rather than the ease of use and the efficiency that was at least an initial setting point. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I describe it as packaging. The packaging had to be right. So you asked me what were the things that bent the curve.
Yeah.
The fact that we were pricing it, and then you think of the package as an envelope. So, you don't have to buy 10 envelopes to get 5 signatures. You only have to buy 1. So that was number one. So constructed in the mind of a person like, this is a digital envelope that's going to go out and come back for one price. And then, yes, we set the price at such a point where it was basically a couple of dollars. So as opposed to one envelope that you would have to send for $10 or $12, you could, times 10, you would send one envelope and it would get the whole thing back. And we said, okay, well, not only can you send it to multiple people, you can do it simultaneously and you can get it all back for, $2. And then we can get it done in minutes or seconds as compared to days, right? Because again, FedEx as compared to a fax machine was considered instantaneous. I could fax something to you. It would be there in seconds. You could sign the thing, put it back in your fax machine, and I'd get it back in seconds. We could do that or faster and cheaper and be able to fully track it. Because the one thing you couldn't do with a fax machine was track who had it, who hadn't signed it, who had signed it, whether it had come back, we don't know. DocuSign was fully traceable. So the packaging, the pricing, and the way it was positioned relative to its alternative competition was essential. So that was certainly number one. And it was, I'm proud to say, quite honestly, that after a lot of figuring that out, here we are almost 25 years later, the packaging and pricing is still the same. It has not changed. And there are very few companies, historically speaking, that have not changed their go-to-market business model after they got to market, particularly software companies.
Look, 100%. It's clearly been a transformational technology, right? I think, and I lived in a world where, my dad was doing import export from Asia. He was sat in the UK, and, we had a telex in the office. And it was definitely very fax and telex and kind of phone call heavy and all this sort of stuff, and contracts going back and forth and what have you. But it literally has transformed the way we think about, not even think about, right? We don't have to think about it, I guess is the point, right? It's transformed the way we execute on documents that require signatures, etc. And one of the questions I guess I would pose to you is, how much effort or work needed to go into, because presumably at that time there were no protocols for digital signature or for e-signature. So how much work or lobbying maybe did you have to do to encourage people to adopt that, or did there need, like, was it as simple as, adding a clause on their documentation that e-signatures, would count? Because I guess that security and all of those sort of questions, like, watching someone sign, with wet ink, etc., and maybe having someone who's witnessed is very, is one way of verifying, whereas a digital signature obviously has other ways of verifying. So yeah, no, I mean, it's a bit of a rambled question, but how much of that did you have to overcome during this whole process?
Well, that was the next order problem that we had to solve.
Okay.
To address that one in this moment, simply because you asked it here, this was one of my favorite, I'll call it founder moments. And the founder moment was, we had a national law in the United States at the time that had been passed in the late 90s by the federal government called the E-Sign Act. It had been championed by, as it turned out, one of the state representatives in the state of Washington, where I was based outside of Seattle. And I got to know him quite well, but the law had been on the books for several years, but nobody was taking advantage of it. And it basically said that a digital signature was, at a federal level, legal and defensible. So when we brought DocuSign to market, we knew that it existed under an existing federal law. So we didn't have to worry about state to state. That was all good. However, our biggest roadblock to early success was the chief legal officer in every company we talked to, because their job is to say no to things that have risk associated with them. And I respect that. That's why they're paid to do. They're paid to be cautious. And they would respond. The business people would get quite excited about the prospect of using this for sales or whatever else they wanted to do with it. And the legal officer would say, hell no, we can't let this happen. There's no precedent. There's no court case. There's nothing for us. Yes, you can send us the federal E-Sign Act. That's all well and good, but nobody's ever taken it to court. We don't know if it's any good, right? So this was very frustrating in the beginning, and it caused me to do something unusual. What I did in the moment, because I was a bit desperate to figure it out, is I actually went out and I hired a judge, a jury, a prosecution and defense counsel, and I found a court case that had been adjudicated around a proposed fraudulent signature in the insurance space. And I recrafted the case as if the document had been DocuSigned. And we had them run through the entire proceedings with arguments on both sides, jury, the whole thing, recorded the whole thing, with the hope that the case would resolve in favor of the DocuSign signature being defensible. That's all I wanted. I just wanted a positive outcome. What I got far exceeded my expectation. What I got was not only a positive response, but the judge who we had hired to run the case had a history of a number of document fraud cases under his belt.
Right.
And he actually wrote a separate opinion paper that it was appended to the legal outcome of the case that said, I've sat as a judge in many of these cases. This case was by far superior to any form of signature or authentication that I've ever witnessed, fax, ink, or otherwise. There was far more proof for chain of evidence, control. He said this was an open and shut case from my perspective as a judge. And I think this, basically he gave us so much more in his opinion than we anticipated. And with that in hand, I could then go to those legal officers and give them confidence that it would hold up. So that was what I did. Now, it happened to be that I also got lucky on one part. And one part had nothing to do with what I did personally, but we were a very early adopter in 2003-4 of .NET technology from Microsoft.
Yeah.
.NET was brand new at that time. It had just been released. And it was Microsoft's habit that every month they would hold, the senior executives of the whole company would come together in their executive briefing center. to hear from one or two of the heads of the various divisions of Microsoft. And it just so happened that somewhere in 2004, early 2005, the .NET team came to present to the other executives of Microsoft. And they gave us no forewarning. There was no ask. They literally just stood up on the stage in front of the entire executive team at Microsoft and said, yeah, here's the current state of .NET. There's this local company called DocuSign who's using it that is like, should be the poster child. They are really doing the best possible work with this tech. It's fantastic. We love it. The next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call from the chief legal officer at Microsoft saying, I just got out of the EBC. It sounds like you guys are doing a great job implementing our technology. We should be using it. How do we become a customer?
Wow.
And for anybody listening, in 2003, 4, 5, Microsoft was the biggest, baddest gorilla in the jungle. There was no bigger, more influential company in the world. And for them to say, we're going to use this, and we're going to use this globally and internally, was the single largest vote of approval one could ever hope to achieve. So the combination of getting that legal opinion and Microsoft becoming a corporate enterprise level customer meant that basically the water was safe for everybody to jump in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those were huge inflection points in the company.
Yeah, essentially, if a behemoth like Microsoft is adopting this, we don't have risk here. Like if they're essentially at risk of the pun, but if they are signing off on this, then hopefully we should be okay in our much smaller, much more niche kind of company adopting this. And I mean, the other thing I'll move on in a second, but the other thing that really actually fascinated me is you said you started off focused on the real estate industry, and presumably because we all know about conveyancing, there's like a hell of a lot of documents to be signed. Was that the reason why, or was it, did you think it was going to be an easier sector to penetrate, or like what led to the decision to choose real estate as your kind of beachhead?
So I always talk to founders about finding signal in the noise, right? Where you test your product by launching it in a number of different areas, and we were testing it in lots of different verticals. And you can imagine digital signing is a horizontally applicable tool. There's no specific industry for which it is uniquely differentiated necessarily. So we could go anywhere. That's part of the problem. What happened was that I was able to cut a deal early on in the company's life cycle with the National Association of Realtors in the United States. And then the NAR, the National Association, had a piece of software that they had written for all of the realtors across the United States. They had 3 million embedded users that was used to produce the documents to buy and sell homes across the country. And I went to them and we cut a deal where they would embed the DocuSign technology as a button in their software. It was a completely white labeled experience. So for any realtor using the software, it would appear that it was just another feature that they had added. However, the one thing I insisted on was that the stamp that was applied to the document when somebody signed said, DocuSigned by.
Got it.
That was my branding moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So it became a feature that all these realtors wanted to start using. Because it meant that their job of corralling all the parties necessary, all the documents and all the parties necessary to sign became infinitely easier and less expensive and less timely. So, less time consuming. Because anyone who has ever bought and sold a home without using DocuSign or some electronic signature, it takes, you have to schedule an hour or two of signing documents. And your spouse, if you have a spouse, and the counterparty has to do the same. And it can take days or weeks historically. So this just made everybody's life infinitely easier. And the interesting thing was that for the first maybe 3 years when we were generating revenue, up to probably year 5, it was the #1 producing sector that we were following. And it just exploded. It was such a no-brainer for realty that once we then saw that and leaned in on it and we realized that if we leaned in there, it would give us the opportunity to get into the adjacent markets. And the adjacent markets became auto loans and student loans and other things that were tied to doing financial transactions or large scale commitments, which then led to general sales of non-financial instruments. If you imagine that as a home buyer or seller, the transaction of buying and selling your personal home is probably the most valuable asset you will ever personally transact. And if you understand that it's like, wow, if I can buy and sell my house using this tool, I could easily use this in my day job, whatever my day job is. So that became the catalyst that then drove it into all the adjacent use cases. But that one was ultimately the perfect go-to-market sector.
I mean, it's incredible. I want to move on. I mean, the last thing I'll say is just had a couple of German guests on over the course of the last couple of weeks. And if you could head out to Germany and just go speak to some of the notaries there, I think they'd really be, they like both the founders and the investors out in Germany would be super happy if you could do that. Cause I think they're still a little bit behind. But look, we're gonna change tack a little bit because, DocuSign was, I guess now, in your past and in the back mirror, in the rear view mirror a little bit. And I want to talk about kind of what you're doing now. So, when you strip away sector specifics, what are the repeat failure modes that you see in venture scale companies? And what are the fastest interventions that really work? Maybe thinking both about DocuSign and the other sort of 3-4 companies that you've built, and maybe, specifically the one that was, as you called it, an abject failure, but also what you're seeing amongst the founders that you're working with at Founder Nexus.
Founder Nexus. So yeah, the failure, the principal failure mode, and this is broad-based. So I've been at this for over 30 years as a founder. And what I've observed over those 3 decades is that the vast majority of modes of failure originate with the founders, interestingly. And so what does that mean? It means they made decisions, hired people, steered the company slightly incorrectly at critical times. But ultimately, if you really tease it out, if you do a real retrospective on most of these failures, it comes down to some of the key decisions the founders made along the way. All right. So with that understanding, it's like, how can I help founders make better decisions? So Founder Nexus was the response to that. It was, what does it mean to make a better decision, first of all? And I describe odds of success in venture scale businesses as being defined under something I call the success equation. So the success equation says that every action and decision that the founders take specifically, think of them all as integer variables, 0 to 1, multiplied in a long string together. So decision, 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 all multiplied together. You can, if you get it dead wrong, it's a 0. If you get it 100% right, it's a 1. So imagine you get every decision 100% right. It's ones across the board. Your odds of success are basically 100%. It's a 1, right? If any one of those decisions, and there are hundreds of them in the life cycle of a founder or founders, is a 0, the entire equation fails.
Everything fails. Yeah.
Okay. That's obvious, but interesting to think of in that context. The other thing one realizes that any set of decisions, even a small grouping below average, which means below 0.5, whatever that relative value is, in that string means that the equation is falling towards failure. So no wonder only a tiny percentage of venture scale businesses succeed. So Founder Nexus is the response, because if you imagine that if you can bring a group of founders together with matched similar experiences and give them opportunities to interact and solve problems together by virtue of sharing lived experience, if every decision is brought to that table, let's say you came in at this level on a scale of 0 to 1, if you talk to other founders about that and you get their insights, you're going to make a better decision.
Sure.
I don't care. You're not going to stay the same, and you're certainly not going to get worse. You're going to make a better decision. And if you do that across all those decisions in a chain, the odds of success go up dramatically. And I say I'm going to triple the odds of success. I think triple is a low percentage differential. I think it could be an order of magnitude. It could be a 10x change for Founder Nexus members as opposed to non-members, based on this mathematical reality. And so it both addresses the primary, you asked what are the primary failure modes? Founder dynamics, founder decisions, hiring, firing, all of those, every one of those
which market
integer
to enter,
decisions,
when to enter, how do you price,
all of the
all
above,
of it.
everything.
Yeah.
So like, this was how to solve it. This was how to dramatically change the success percentage at the end of the day. And so these two things both go hand in glove. It's like figuring out what the major failure mode was, and then how do we address it?
So we're gonna get on to kind of that whole advice area, because one of the things that I've noticed, right, is I see often two types of founders, right? Like one type of founder that tries to get advice from everyone, but then actually is unable to make a decision because information overload, or they don't have the confidence, etc. You have another type of founder that either gets advice from everyone or simply doesn't listen to the advice of anyone, right? And just goes ahead and makes their own decision. I guess, you know, for Founder Nexus to be really valuable, you want those founders that are kind of at that intersection where they are both open and willing to hear, and I don't even know if advice is the right word, but, you know, constructive experience, exactly. Yes. But then not necessarily just say, okay, you know, Court did this, therefore I'm going to do the same thing, but rather that will inform my decision, right, or the decisions I'm going to make, as opposed to actually them, you know, making their decision based on what you've done yourself.
So this was also part of the reason I structured Founder Nexus the way that I did, which is to say, I am in my career often brought into companies as a voice of experience.
Sure.
Appropriate. And yet I have exactly one person's life of experience, my own. I've seen a lot and I have a lot of experiences, but it still boils down to what I've seen and done or been party of. Founder Nexus is, again, an answer to that. It's not levered on Court's experience. It's levered on the experience of the world of founders. So that, because if I were to give you my experience, it would be, some portions of my experience might be useful to you because you're you and you think differently. You have a different personality, a different culture in your company, different customers, different trajectory. You'll be able to absorb a small percentage of what my experience was and put it into action. If I introduce you to 10 of me or 100 of me, and each one of those persons brings one or two extra nuggets, now you have the makings of a real influential difference, right? So you might have absorbed one or two from me, but across multiple people, that might be 5 or 10 critical nuggets of information that get that decision from a 0.3 to a 0.7 or a 0.8, right? And every one of those decisions that gets radically changed multiplies out towards your outcome. So to me, that's the beauty of this model, which is I'm incorporating it in such a way that we're enticing the most experienced founders around the table and giving them a platform and a method to share that experience with others, so that the listener gets lots of nuggets of insight, not just one person's nuggets of insight.
Yeah. So let's dive into that a bit deeper, right? So you're advocating for experience rather than advice, and that obviously the best guidance comes from founders who've been in the seat, who've been there, who've done that. And to your point, right? Like the advice that you might have about selling a software business might be, for argument's sake, based on your experience building DocuSign back in 2006, let's say, for example. But in 2025, whilst a lot of your experience may be relevant, there might be little bits that are, that are different in today's environment versus the last one, right? So I really love to understand how Founder Nexus kind of operationalizes that whole attitude of experience over advice, right? So you stage matching, you've got small room conversations and dynamics. And ultimately, what have you actually learned about what changes founders' decisions post-participation? Like, to my earlier point, do they come out of the room and say, okay, these guys had some good ideas, but I'm going to go off and do my own thing? Or like, how do you, and I guess, how do you also track whether it is as a result of their participation in Founder Nexus that they've gone on to make those better decisions rather than just on their own?
I don't know that I have a good way to say we track it other than the acknowledgement of the participants when they say, oh my God, that session just completely, I got 2 or 3 nuggets out of that one. So we routinely do follow-ups on every session at every touch point with every person to ask them, what did you learn today? What can you implement coming out of this session? And we're constantly keeping track of all the things that are being learned and being implemented. Not everybody answers every question, so it's not 100%, but we get a clear sense. And the other thing I think is, people don't leave this organization with this membership once they start it.
Yeah.
Right. So they begin and they're like, oh my God, this is completely different than any other, YPO, EO, Vestas, Hamptons, you name it. I've never experienced anything like this. And even if I'm doing those other things, I feel this is bringing unique value to my experience. And as such, I am going to join and stay a participant over months or years, because this is going to be transformational for my outcome.
And not only that, I mean, like, there's two things that immediately spring to mind, right? One is the network effects that you generate as a result of that are incredible, right? So the more founders and the more experienced founders that join, the more valuable the network becomes, and because they're then hopefully assisting in creating even more, experienced founders, then those people continue and start giving back.
Beautiful
to the community.
flywheel. Yes.
Absolutely, massive flywheel. But the second thing is, I wonder, and I would almost suggest that almost the best advocates are the founders that participate who failed, right? Because actually, the obvious point is you learn through the failures. Like, with hindsight, you can never know which actions of yours that you took that were success. I mean, like, you can obviously, you can probably figure it out to a large extent, right? But you also don't know how much of it is luck versus, deliberate action. Whereas if you fail, you know that this failure, this wrong decision is what tanked or is what caused us to collapse revenue or lose or churn a customer or whatever, right? So how do you think about that? Do you welcome kind of previously failed founders, even if, even if they, or rather, even though they weren't able to scale their own businesses, but let's say they raised some venture, they went at it for 2, 3, 4 years, but, ultimately it didn't work out. Like, how do you think about that?
I think that's the most valuable experience.
Yeah.
So those, not only do I welcome those people, I consider that a badge of honor.
Yeah.
So when I look around the room at every founder in the space that joins Founder Nexus, every one of us has had at least one failure. And that's an important distinction of having multiple years under your belt, in my opinion, because you learn so much from the things that don't work, that you understand how hard this journey really is. This job we take on as founders is kind of doomed to fail for most, 97% of the time, and yet we all still sign up joyfully and keep coming at it and banging our head against the wall.
We're all masochists, yeah.
We are completely masochists. So I celebrate those setbacks. I don't even know that I need to refer to them as failures, but look, because those are the things that we learn from. And when we can bring that learning, I call it scar tissue.
Yeah.
When you've built up enough scar tissue, you don't want more. You've earned your stripes, you've got your scar tissue, and you're like, oh wow, now I really don't want to have to go back into the torture room and get more scar tissue if I can help it. I'm now much more willing to sit and listen to other people's scar tissue so that I can avoid it and I can learn from it, which is why I index on 3+ years of experience and having done a few things, because after those moments, you've accumulated enough hard knocks to understand the value of absorbing and acting on other people's experiences, as opposed to just thinking, I've got this, I know how to do it, right? So in the early going, my own experience showed me that early stage, somebody early in their founder's journey, year 1, 2, 3, often doesn't have that level of sensitivity yet. They're not listening. They're not as good at absorbing and implementing other people's ideas. Once you've had your ass handed to you a few times,
you become
or
more
a few dozen times,
Sure.
Then you're like, oh, okay, I really don't want to go back into that torture room. Let me figure out if there's an easier way to fundraise, or an easier way to find my first customer, or to package my first product, or like. And I'm very open now. My ears are wide open to listening to other people's experiences on how they did that successfully. So yeah, I mean, I think, in fact, funny sidebar story. The very first Founder Nexus experience I had, first chapter, first launch event, nobody's ever heard the thing. And I built all this software which breaks people up into these little discrete discussion groups and everything else. And I'm finished my talk and I push the button. Nothing. Didn't work at all. The software just in that moment completely failed me. So I've got a room full of people, everybody's excited, and I'm like, demo, like software fail.
Yeah.
And as I'm up there, slightly panicking, because as we all do when our demos fail.
Yeah. Which is, by the way, like the only truism in tech is that your demo is always going to fail. Like, I mean, that's
so this was the beautiful moment was I took that moment and I paused and I'm standing at my computer and I looked up into the room and I said, all right, guys, show of hands. How many of you have had this exact experience? Every hand in the room goes up, every hand, like everyone. So now you've got an entire room who's they all look around at each other with their hands in the air and the whole room busts out laughing. Okay. Problem solved. Tension dissolved. Everybody's just now chill. They're all realize that they are surrounded by true peers, not by a bunch of wannabes, but by true peers. Took me a second, got the software running. It worked a second time. We all started breaking up. But that moment right there defined a Founder Nexus moment. It was like, we all share the fact that we have failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was beautiful and catalytic. And I almost felt like I needed to repeat it when I started opening other chapters after that. Didn't need to, but it's still a very powerful moment.
Yeah, no, I think this is the thing, right? And I think you just touched on it just there, because there are lots of people that are attracted to venture and founding a business because, obviously over the last 5-6 years, we've had this lionization and kind of putting on a pedestal of founders. So, you've had the swing between founders as the ideal and then, investors as the ideal, and now it's back to founders or whatever. But I've certainly come across many founders who are doing it for the wrong reason, right? Like they go the wrong way around. They're like, not here's a problem I need to solve, or there's a problem that I've seen and I need to solve it. Rather than move to here's a solution I need to solve. And I think I'm probably guilty of this as well. Here's a solution I need to build. I'll figure out the problem later. But there are those that actually just want to do it to be able to say, well, I raised some capital, I did this, I did that, rather than, okay, I'm actually trying to build something here. And you see that especially when a founder books out of their business really quickly. They don't have the staying power, the grit, etc. And I think the really valuable thing, and exactly as you said, is to understand, like, true founders, they're not at the events, they're not boasting on LinkedIn about what they're doing. They're not on Twitter shouting to shouting into the wild. Like, they are almost certainly fixing stuff that's gone wrong, like day in, day out, and it's also that appreciation of the journey where, that old kind of meme, being a founder is like being knocked in the face 150 times. Then you have one day where you get to punch back, and then it's another 150 days of getting knocked in the face. I think the relief you feel as a founder, especially if you're a solo founder, especially, right? Like I would say, more so than maybe a co-founder, but even a co-founding team are within their own bubble. But as a founder, just understanding that actually everyone's going through that same pain is massively cathartic, and it takes away a lot of the imposter syndrome and all of the angst that you feel as a founder, where you're like, am I screwing this up? Am I doing this the right way? Or like, how come everyone else has it easy? When you look around the room and everyone's had that same problem, everyone's had that demo failure, it's actually a huge weight being lifted off, right?
I didn't intend for Founder Nexus to be a mental health organization.
Sure.
However, you are entirely correct in characterizing it that way. It is sort of the second order benefit that as soon as you get to a moment where you have the world, I often describe or talk about the fact that founders as a class of human are very hard to detect in the wild. You can't walk into a room and know who the founders are in the room, right? And you have to discover them in a normal social situation. And that takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes focus, and it's hard. So what Founder Nexus does immediately is it strips all of the non-founders out of the equation, and it strips all of the early stage founders out of the equation. So now you've got a pure room full of people who are highly experienced with failure, venture-backed founders.
Yeah.
If you start with a room like that, the level of mental health that just is created just walking into that environment is palpable.
Yeah.
And you get this sense of, oh, okay, I'm home. I'm with my people here. Like I can't take my problems to my spouse or my parents, my siblings, my best friends. None of them understand this journey because they haven't done it.
Mm.
And they want to empathize with me. They want to be supportive. It's kind of like I said, the guidance I got from my investors, advisors, and board members, who I love as humans, and they're great people, and they otherwise gave me great guidance. But look, sometimes just not having that on your experience curve, it means that you just can't have a tete-a-tete moment.
Mm.
So it's really cathartic
Mm.
for founders to be able to enter a Founder Nexus space and be surrounded by their kin.
Yeah. So there's someone you should certainly meet, and I will make the introduction. So a chap called Joe Perkins, and or Joe Perkin, I can't remember if it's got the S at the end or not, so apologies, Joe. But Joe built a couple of things. So he built Landscape VC, which is basically like a Glassdoor for VCs. But actually off the back of that, he created a Slack group called Anonymous Founders. And, it is a really cathartic, just like, whatever you want to say kind of goes, obviously within reason. And precisely to your point, it is both knowing that you have peers that can advise you, but also, you can just sit there and vent, on a Slack message. You can just sit there and say, the fundraising isn't going the way I planned. I might have to reduce payroll, right? Like, and you're not even looking for the guidance as to how do I do that or what do I do. You just want someone to say, it's cool, you've got this, been through it. Next month will be different, and the month after will be
I'll
different.
I'll give you a concrete example of that, Arish, which is last month I was sitting with a group of founders. We were having one of our events, and one of the founders was saying that she'd had 30 VC meetings, 25 or 30 VC meetings without any success. And I said, well, it took me over 100 to get my first check. And you should have seen her light up, right? What? It took you 100? I'm saying, yeah, that's pretty much the average. 100 meetings to get one check.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she's like, oh my God. All right, well, I'm re-energized now.
Yeah.
I was feeling really depressed. Now I feel like I'm barely scratched the surface. I need to get on it.
I'm only 30% of the way through.
I'm only 30% of the way there.
Yeah.
And she said, if somebody like you has to take 100 meetings, okay, I need to just keep going. And she said, I was so beat down before that discussion, and I feel so energized coming out of it because I now realize I'm only part of the way.
Yeah. I mean, look, that I'm sold on what you're doing anyway. I don't think you need me to tell you that. And actually, you're in London at the moment, you're building out the London chapter. So what does the quality bar look like for that? Who gets in, who doesn't? And how do you measure whether this community is creating real compounding advantage for members rather than becoming just another calendar event, right? Because I think there is that risk because, there is so much, in the world of venture that is, there's a constant, come meet this panel, come to this pizza and wine event, come to this pitch event. If you're not at Slush or if you're not at Bits and Pretzels in Berlin, or if you're not going to the US for XYZ, like then, it feels like, again, that you're a bit of a failure. And so, how do you measure that success, I guess? And how do you make sure that founders don't end up feeling like this is just another thing that's trying to sell at me?
Right. And first of all, we're not trying to sell anyone. We're trying to encourage people to show up, who will authentically contribute to this organization or to their own advancement and to the advancement of others. So why London? Let's start with that. London is an incredible town for business, and it is the venture community here is growing, but it's still, let's just say it's still not at Seattle, San Francisco, New York level.
Sure.
Okay. And it could be, and it should be. And I want to be a part of that. I want to help build that future for London. As around across the EU and other cities as well. We have members in Paris and Berlin and Munich and such. So look, that's why we're here. Second thing, what's different about Founder Nexus? Founder Nexus is unlike any other group any founder has ever experienced because we index entirely on problem solving.
Yeah.
So we don't gather just to listen to a speaker. We gather to engage each other and help solve problems or help surface solutions to other problems. So
Yeah.
the way I describe it is, first of all, advice versus experience. Let's unpack that for a second. If I give you advice, I'm very often going to be wrong because I don't know you well enough. I don't know all the idiosyncrasies of your circumstances, etc. If I share with you my experience, I can never be wrong. What you take out of my experience is up to you.
Yeah.
Therefore, if I simply share experience, so that's our baseline. Never give advice. If you start a sentence with you should, or I would, we politely ask you to rephrase it in terms of, please tell us what you did and what happened. Okay, so that's first, advice versus experience. Second, we put people in small, I call them micro forums. If people have experienced, these other groups of forums where you get assigned to a group and it lasts for years, they're fantastic, but you're going to extract most of the business wisdom from that group in the first few months.
Yeah.
Okay, so a micro forum, the format I built for Founder Nexus is, you're going to be assigned to a 5 to 6 person group for between 30 and 60 minutes. You're going to be given a topic. You're going to be assigned by stage of your corporate development. Where are you in your cycle? And often by geography. So what is your locale? So you can learn from local founders. You're going to learn from founders that are at a similar or higher stage than you are. So you're going to learn by people that have experience that meets or exceeds your own. And you're going to be specifically talking about a particular topic in your little micro forum. The goal there is person one says, here's my challenge on that topic. The other 5 people get to say, here's what I did when I faced that challenge, and here's what happened. And then we go around the room for 30 to 60 minutes and extract as much insight as we can as a group. But the goal is not to solve any problem in the room.
Yep.
The goal is to surface as many alternatives to my problem as possible in that time frame, so that I have actionable things I can leave and go implement against.
Here's the phase space of potential decisions that you could make, rather than this
exactly.
Is the
I go back to that
decision
success equation. I'm going to take a few nuggets and I'm going to go from a 0.3 to a 0.6 by implementing a couple of the things that I heard in that room. And then I'm going to reassign you to a new room, new topic, similar stage, whatever. And you're going to go again and again and again. And we repeat this. So every single touch point in a Founder Nexus environment is about problem solving together as a group in small groups. Okay, so that's right away uniquely differentiated. But because I keep switching the participation of the groups, unlike a continuous forum, these micro forums mean I'm always going to be meeting new founders. I'm always going to be getting insights from different people's journeys, but the topic is the same. So if I'm talking about fundraising or dealing with a challenging co-founder or globalizing my business and going to the US, every time that topic comes up, different people will be in the room and I'll get to hear different insights, right? And so as I say, if you just meet me, you get one person's experience. I'm exposing you to the world. And I can do this not only local to you, but also I can expose you to the world of people, founders at your stage or above, who've also walked that path and solved those problems and dealt with those issues, so that you can learn from them as well.
And I think that was one of the key things that I think just arose in my mind was exactly that, because you talked about, okay, you could be locale specific, but actually the benefit of talking to a founder in the Valley or in New York or equally like a founder in the US that is trying to come to Europe, right? Like, whereas most of these networks or many of these networks tend to be quite location specific just because of time zones and this, that, the other. And also, your ability to build community in one place versus the other. But actually getting that exposure to, again, people who've built in different places or have raised in different places or have launched at different stages and in different market cycles and conditions, right? Because again, the people who launched their businesses in 2021 will have had a very different experience than those that launched in 2023, et cetera, right? It's that combination of like the Brownian motion, if I can put it that way, of having all of these people knock together and build that experience. I mean, the obvious thing that comes to my mind, and without trying to dig into your product roadmap, is like if you can capture that over time and build that knowledge bank, that becomes like just an incredible resource for for anyone, right? Whether where at whatever stage of the journey they are. Because the other thing that I think is really important to think about here is that obviously there are certain problems that are very stage specific, but there are problems that you may encounter in your business earlier than someone else, right? So if you are a business that is reliant on expanding to the US early, then it may be valuable to still speak to someone who's done it much later in the journey, as much as it is as someone who's done it early in your journey, because again, there are differentials in how you may take that approach. So anyway, my point being, just having that breadth of experience from across the globe, across stages, across verticals and sectors. Because the other thing is, like, there's a VC that I interviewed a couple of years or a year ago, I think now. He had been investing off a family office balance sheet into predominantly gaming industry, but the fund that he has now built has taken the learnings of the go-to-market strategies and the monetization and the kind of growth strategies of these gaming businesses, and they are applying it to non-gaming companies as well, right? So you can cross-fertilize ideas in a way that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily be able to do, which I think is phenomenally powerful.
The other thing I'll say is that we encourage all the co-founders to join Founder Nexus, not just the CEO.
Yeah. Because
the founders are a different class of person in an organization.
Yeah.
And the reason I encourage all of them, and I will tell you that the more co-founders that join and participate, it has an exponentially beneficial effect to the company, because each of them is being asked to actuate a certain set of decisions and actions relative to their company and their various roles. And the more they have that backstop of access to other founders who are similarly placed in their organizations, the better the whole team performs, right? And as you look across, not just that, therefore that there's no need to be industry specific. You could equally learn, if you're in health tech, you could learn from somebody in deep tech, in space tech, in agri-tech, in climate tech, right? The industry matters less than the experience of building something venture scale.
Yeah.
So that's the common thread here, is that I talk about those three delimiters of 3 years of experience or more, having raised some capital, and venture scale. Those are the common thread. And I talk about, the term I use is community of common interest, right? And that binds everyone together such that you don't have to be industry specific. You don't even have to be role specific.
Yeah.
You can learn from the combined wisdom and experience of that community of common interest.
Yeah.
And that's at scale extraordinarily powerful. One of the most valuable aspects that's commonly stated about Y Combinator is the ability for the founders that have been through that program to utilize each other to test their software, to become first customers, to try stuff out, to help introduce them to new paying customers. Like, hey, I'm trying to, you just post in and so Founder Nexus becomes that at ginormous scale globally. Because you're like, oh, I want to get from the UK to US, US to the UK, or I'm in, I want to go to Tokyo, I want to go to Berlin, I want to go to wherever. And you have founders in the area that are native to that can tell you their stories. And how do you get in? And let me introduce you to this customer you're trying to, or this investor in my neighborhood.
Or even importantly, don't do this because of X, Y, Z. And you're gonna have, like, if you try to scale into France, hopefully you're not gonna, build out an employee base there because you're never gonna be able to get rid of them, or whatever it might be, right? Like, have you thought about these things? Because these are challenges that you're gonna end up facing. I think it's massively powerful. I can't wait to be involved. And obviously you and I have spoken a lot about what it is that you're planning moving forward. Court, this has been an incredible conversation. I want to end off with a couple of questions that I ask all of my guests. What is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
I don't know that I'd call it contrarian. It's certainly a thesis that I'm propagating, which is, I think we will see very shortly a very strong retrenching of our entire worldwide education system.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah.
I believe that the advent of AI is going to radically change and demand, frankly, that the structure of our global education system, which was developed in the post-industrial age to develop factory workers, basically.
Yeah. Or managerial class. Yeah, sure.
cogs in a machine, is going to have to fundamentally revert back to what preceded our current educational system, which I believe is some form of apprenticeship. I think apprenticeship, which died off in the post-industrial age as a predominant means of learning a craft, will make a forceful comeback in the age of AI, and it will unseat or be the probable dominant form of education. And so we will no longer need to send our kids to high school and college necessarily. We're going to involve them in the workforce as apprentices much earlier in their cycle, and they're going to learn their craft and how to think and engage. And that's my predictive contrarian view. I'm not sure that I haven't heard anybody else espousing that one yet.
I mean, I have, just so that you're aware. And like, I literally have one of my daughters going to university right now, or as in she's applying for university right now. But what I've said to her, I said, if we were 5 years ahead of this, I wouldn't be telling you to go to university. The only reason I'm telling you to do it today is because I still know that credentialism is a thing. If you are looking for a job, people are going to ask that question. But I think moving forward, as long as you treat that for what it is, but if you just learn things on the side by doing, and I've been, getting her to go out and work shadow and do these sort of things, I think that ability to work with other people early doors, like understand how to do that, how to think critically, and how to apply across sectors. Because I think we're going to see, to an extent, not the death of, but certainly a change in the need for depth of experience versus breadth of experience, and which all, by the way, are amazing traits to have as a founder as well, right? And yeah, so yes, anyway, you're preaching to the converted as far as that's concerned.
Good.
And finally, so we can get to know the real you. I think I have a fairly good idea already, but what is something that moves you emotionally?
Oh my goodness, moves me emotionally. I am very big into sport. So for me, I love all sports. I was an active participant in many things in my life. And as of this time of year, because we're recording this near the Christmas season, I'm an avid skier, and I tend to get 40 to 60 ski days in a year. I ski almost every day in the wintertime, and I'm very much looking forward to ski season starting. But look, I get involved in a lot of things, but I'm a huge college basketball fan. I get very emotionally involved in that. So yeah, it's stuff like that. Sports
and activity and presumably within that, the camaraderie of participating in team activity and all that.
Actually,
all that
you know what? I'm gonna boil it down a slightly different way, because I think there's another way to think about this. I had a few years ago, I had a near-death experience. I was very scary. Should not be alive today. And out of that experience came a revelation that at the end of life, the only scorecard that actually matters are the relationships that you formed during your lifetime. And when I say relationship, that is not about a network. To me, a relationship is different. It is deeper. A relationship to me means that I had an impact on somebody's trajectory in their life, and that they had an impact on mine, or both. And I believe that at the end of our lives, the more relationships, impactful relationships we have, that's the scorecard that matters. And so when I say that moves me, that is the foundational aspect of Founder Nexus, is to build the largest global network of impactful relationships that can change the trajectory of the world economy, and by therefore the world.
Yeah.
Like that is literally what I'm aspiring to do.
I mean, it is, just awe-inspiring and just also incredibly scary. But I mean, I couldn't think of someone better suited to be trying to do that. I think it's incredible. And I'm sorry to hear about your experience, but it's incredible to see you therefore up and just going at it in the way you are. Court, this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to join me. For our audience, for our listeners, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on X? Where's the best place for them to look you on?
LinkedIn is by far the best. So either my name, Court Lorenzini, on LinkedIn. You can look me up or Founder Nexus is there as well. And please, for any of the founders that are out there, we would love to have you, come kick the tires. Our website, foundernexus.com. Any founders, there's a big apply now button, and we will begin the evaluation process. And if you're qualified, we would love to meet you.
Amazing. Well, I will certainly be spreading the word. Court, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Arish, thank you again. It's been a lovely afternoon, and thanks for having me on.